Okay, the last talk was sort of broad and covered a lot of territory with tunnels and greenhouses and this and that, and sort of whet your appetite. This one zeroes in more on some of the ways to prevent problems in the greenhouse and shows pictures of things that might go wrong. Doesn't mean they will go wrong, and how to prevent, how to diagnose and prevent. So sort of, I like to call it when bad things happen to good tomatoes, because you try to do everything right. Everybody does their best, read up and go to workshops, and you do your best, but sometimes things still happen. So they don't always come out perfect like this. Nobody gets 100% number one quality. In the greenhouse, the percent number one is pretty high. It's 90-something percent. It could be 95%, 91%, just depending on your management and the weather and if you're keeping the temperature properly set. So temperature is one of the most important things to control in the greenhouse, and it's one of the easiest things to control if all the equipment is working. So I mentioned in the last talk, in your winter set point for your heater, 64. So the question often comes up, yeah, but won't they grow at 55? Yeah, they will. The plants will grow at 55. They're not going to die. Will they grow at 40? Yes, they'll survive at 40. They may even survive at 32. But we're not talking about growing leaves. We're talking about growing fruit that are beautiful and attractive, sell well, and all that. And to get good quality and good yield, you don't want to go under 64 in the winter. So yeah, we're going to burn fuel. You're going to burn fuel. There's no way around that. Fans, you try to keep it under 90 in your hot season. That's the best you can do. And then you have vents, horizontal airflow fans that circulate air in the greenhouse. They keep it moving. That helps dry leaf surfaces. It keeps the flowers nice and dry so they're not getting wet. Shade materials are used to help cool if the exhaust fans aren't doing enough. And for even further cooling, there's pad and fan system, and there is fogging systems. So the high-low thermometer will record the high and the low, obviously. So once a day you can look at it and see how cold did it actually get last night? How hot did it actually get at the hottest point yesterday? You can see that, you can record it, push a button and reset it. So this is very helpful when you're trying to diagnose problems. I'm not getting enough fruit set. I'm losing flowers. So your agent will say, well, how hot did it get in there, or how cold did it get? With this, you'll know. Avoid overcrowding. Crowding isn't good for people. It's not good for tomatoes. I used to say I don't mind crowds, but I can't stand people. But I'm just exaggerating. Not at all. Avoid overcrowding. So 5 square feet per plant is really a good point to remember, because I talked a little bit about this before, but I did a lot of research on this particular item on my master's, which was Ohio State University, if anybody ever heard of that. And with population, as the population goes up, the yield per plant goes down. So say you have 600 plants in the greenhouse and you get so many pounds from the greenhouse, from the total greenhouse. Now suppose you have 900 plants in the same greenhouse. Guess what? The yield for the whole greenhouse, roughly the same. The yield per greenhouse is roughly the same because the yield per plant drops. But you're spending more on seeds, and seeds are very expensive. You're spending more on fertilizer. You're spending more on water. You're spending more on labor. For the suckering, the wrapping. I mean, everything you do, you're doing it on 900 plants instead of 600 plants. So it's expensive. And on top of that, the quality goes down. There are certain physiological disorders that go up significantly as the crowding is increased. Quality water. We drink water. We drink quality water. This is the best possible water you can get. It's called Great Value. I'm sure it's very expensive. Plants need good quality water too. It doesn't have to be bottled water, but you cannot tell by looking at it. You can't look and say, yeah, actually that looks clear with a pH of 6. It doesn't work. You have to get it tested. So I'm sure the university here has a test site where you can send your water, you can send tissue analysis, you can send disease leaves, you can send anything you want, and they'll test it. I mean, there are private labs too, but I like university labs. So you get it tested, and you tell them it's for greenhouse tomatoes, so they know what to test for, and make sure it's good. Tissue analysis I talked about before, and the thing I didn't mention earlier is that which leaf do you take? Well, if you look it up in textbooks, it will tell you the eighth leaf from the top, or the youngest fully formed leaf. Okay, you can think about that a while. The youngest fully formed leaf. So you don't want this leaf, this leaf, this leaf, this leaf, but this leaf is this big, and the one under it's this big. So that was the one. It's the youngest fully formed leaf. Okay, so here's the simple method. This has a pointer. You want to look for fruit about the size of a golf ball and take the leaf right across from it. Because that way that leaf is the same physiological age across the greenhouse. So it's a simple way to do it without counting and measuring leaves. And then when you send them into the lab, you get a report back. It tells you the layout will be different from this one, which is from Mississippi State. It tells you the sufficiency levels and how much was in there. And if something is high or low, it'll say H or L, so you know. Sometimes if something is slightly low, it's not going to hurt the plant. If it's slightly high, it's probably not going to hurt because it has to be within a range. But if something is way off, you'll know from the tissue analysis. Maintaining equipment, I really talked about that before, but everything needs to be working, and the only way you know is if you check. So you walk in the greenhouse every day, you check. Did you hear the fan come on? Okay, it's working. Is it warm enough in there as soon as you walk in the door? Okay, your heater's working. Your horizontal airflow fan should be spinning and making noise and moving strings and moving leaves. So you check everything. I think I have to aim at the receptor. Use a vented heater. Wow. This one's really important. Every year somebody gets stuck with this problem where they were sold a heater where the sales rep said, our heaters are 100% efficient, you don't have to worry about exhaust. Well, these are often sold to chicken farms, and chickens are not tomatoes. Chickens can tolerate much higher levels of carbon monoxide than tomatoes or people. They can tolerate it. Tomatoes can't. Fairly low levels of carbon monoxide and ethylene are devastating to tomato plants. So you don't want to ever believe a sales rep who says our heaters don't need to be vented because they're 100% efficient, because that's a lie. It doesn't happen. So the heater has to be vented either through the roof or through an end wall. There needs to be a stack going out so the exhaust gas gets out of the greenhouse. This is what carbon monoxide damage looks like. It's usually in combination with ethylene because they're both byproducts of combustion. The leaves are small, twisted, sort of curled up. Sometimes they'll turn upside down like that. It's called epinasty. Sometimes the leaves look like they're wilted, but if you touch them, they don't feel wilted. They're still firm. So those are all symptoms. And the worst symptom of all, those flowers dry up and they fall off. So it's really going to hurt your yield if the flowers fall off, right? You can't get any fruit. So there are two types of ethylene problems. One is chronic, which means a low level, a pretty low level over a long period. The other is acute, which means a high level for a short period. And that short period can be just hours. So the chronic level, these numbers may not mean much, except look how small they are. 0.01 to 0.05 parts per million over long term is enough to make flowers fall off. The acute, if you have 3 hours of 1 part per million of ethylene, a lot of your flowers will just fall off. So the estimate is that 15 to 20% of all heated greenhouses have air pollution problems. So ventilation helps, but also making sure the burner is adjusted when the heater is new. And then it needs to be checked as it gets age on it. Sometimes there are pinholes in the firebox or in the stack where exhaust gases escape into the greenhouse. So this is a common scenario that a grower installs a new heater in the fall, brand new greenhouse, or brand new heater in an old greenhouse, and then within a few days, tomato leaves start to droop. That's the epinasty, but they're not wilted. The plants look otherwise healthy. The root system isn't diseased or damaged. Flowers fall off, upper leaves twist. And one thing you might notice, if you see anything like this, is it worse near the heater and not as bad at the other end? I mean, that's a good diagnostic tool. If it's worse near the heater, it's probably the heater. Okay, next big one is humidity. Missouri gets high humidity in the spring and summer, right? It gets pretty humid. So humidity, one of the things it affects is pollination. The perfect humidity is around 70%, but you can't set that. You can't go in the greenhouse like with a thermostat, set your humidity, and just keep it at 70%. It's not gonna happen. It's like trying to set the temperature outside. It's not going to happen. So not much you can do there. The humidity affects transpiration. Transpiration is how plants cool themselves off. They take in a lot of water through the roots, and it exits through the stomates and the leaves, so it's constantly passing through the plant and cooling it down. So you might think, well, it sure is wasting a lot of water if it's just cooling, but it's not, because without transpiration, there wouldn't be that flow of water through the plant to keep them at a close to ideal temperature. So when it's really humid, they don't transpire as much because it's moist in the air, so the leaves are not evaporating as much from the stomates. So that's not good for the plants. They don't get when the water doesn't pass through, it's not pulling up nutrients through the plant. It slows everything down. So high humidity inhibits transpiration, which is a problem. The plants can get stressed, and high humidity is from the transpiration as well as evaporation. So if there's water on the floor, puddles, wet leaves, wet fruit in the morning, evaporation, your humidity goes up. And then you start to see stuff like this. If your plastic has all these, am I supposed to point both ways? I don't know how that works. Okay, if you see a lot of condensation on the inside of the plastic, wow, you really have a humidity problem. If you see moisture on the fruit, there's a humidity problem. This is one of the diseases that you don't see that often anymore, but Dr. Trinkline did mention this. He called it, remember what he called it? Leaf mold. And the genus now is Fulvia. Pathologists change the Latin name every few years to throw horticulturists off. It used to be Cladosporium. Anyway, now it's Fulvia. And most varieties in the greenhouse have really good resistance to this. So you don't see this much anymore. Like I started 35 years ago in Mississippi, that was our worst disease. Everybody had it. It was awful. And then there were some new varieties with partial resistance, and it wasn't quite as bad. And then there were varieties with full resistance, and it's virtually gone. So what do you do? High humidity. I'm skipping stuff that I did already. Controlling humidity will help with the fruit set, fruit quality, and reduce diseases. We'll cut down on that moisture on the fruit, moisture on the leaves that let diseases develop. So what can you do for it? Exhaust fans are your friend here. And exhaust fans are normally set on the thermostat when to turn on based on temperature. But they will also help with humidity. Like what if it's not too hot in the greenhouse, but the humidity is just like in those pictures. You see the condensation. Well, that happens a lot in the mornings. So in the mornings, you can turn on the exhaust fans, let them run a few minutes, blow that hot, humid air out, turn off the fans, let the heater come on if it's too cold. It will warm the air. You burn a little fuel, but you're warming the air. So you're replacing all that humid air with air that's significantly drier, and that's way better for the plants. So that's a very good technique for driving out the humidity in the mornings. So what else could possibly go wrong in the greenhouse? Well, there are a few things. David Trinkline mentioned blossom end rot and that it's not a biotic problem. It's not caused by a pathogen like a fungus. This one is lack of calcium in the blossom end of the fruit. I'm a little more technical than what he presented because it is very possible to have enough calcium in the leaves and still get blossom end rot. So sometimes you can get a tissue analysis and it says your calcium is between 2 and 5%. It's fine, but you can still get blossom end rot if you've had water problems. So if the plant's wilted, say one day they weren't getting enough water and it was especially bright and sunny and hot, plants wilted a little bit, that's all it takes. If that stream of water stops, or slows down temporarily, then you can get blossom end rot because that water stopped carrying calcium all the way to the fruit. So calcium shortage in the fruit because of water problems is very common. Now we have more water problems, but because it's horticulture, it's very technical, these deeper cracks are called cracking and the surface ones are called splitting. So what's the difference? Splitting is skin deep, so just the skin sort of rips open. Cracking is deeper and it's not moist, it's a dry crack. It's almost always dry. And then these are called radial cracks because they radiate down from the top. Concentric cracks go around the top. But look, all of these are water problems. Not enough water, too much water. Wilted plants and then watering to stop them from wilting, and then you get cells bursting and skins ripping. So it messes up the quality of the fruit. Okay, this one is probably the ugliest of all of them. And it's called cat facing. I have a cat. It doesn't really look like this at either end. I can't see really why it's called cat facing, but it's been called that for many, many years. So cat facing can be crevices, cracks, dimples, scars on the blossom end. So the blossom end is the bottom of the fruit when it's on the plant. It's a general ugliness, and almost always it's from cool temperature. So if you have a home garden and you ever plant them extra early, that's really when you're going to see cat facing in your home garden, because it was too cool. And then as the season warms up, you may not see any more cat facing the whole season. Well, in the greenhouse, this happens if you're not at 64. Suppose your greenhouse got down to 59, and then you'll get a whole flush of cat facing in there from the fruit that were just forming when it was 59 degrees. So they still taste good. You can eat them. You know, with none of these diseases, just like David Trinkline showed a disease, and he said you can still eat the fruit. It doesn't look nice. All of these disorders, you can still eat the fruit. You can't sell the fruit, but you can certainly eat the fruit. Leaf roll, the names are really descriptive. Leaves tend to roll up under certain conditions. And yes, there are some viruses that will cause leaf roll, but we're not getting into diseases. You have a plant pathologist on the faculty. He handles those things. This is a plant response to high fertility and nice moist soils when it's hot out. We see this every year out in the field in Mississippi. It's hot. They're fertigated, they're getting plenty of fertilizer, and the lower leaves will tend to roll up. Has anybody seen this? It's just, sure, it's leaf roll. It's not hurting anything. It looks a little strange, but it's really not hurting the plants. Here's one to worry about when you have a cluster of flowers, and then next time you look, you have 2 fruit, and you're thinking, wow, weren't there 6 or 8 flowers there? Now there are just 2 fruit. Well, flower drop, blossom drop, flower abortion, all of these are the same thing, and there are several reasons why your flowers are falling off. The temperature can be too high, like up in the 90s. You know, you want to try to keep it under 90. There can be too much or too little nitrogen. If the whole plant is nitrogen deficient, that will hurt flower set. Too much nitrogen is even worse. Too much nitrogen, the plant is really dark green, bushy, tall, beautiful looking plant. No fruit. The plant is totally vegetative. It's not making flowers and fruit. The high humidity is what we talked about earlier, the ethylene we talked about earlier, and then any other plant stress, the flowers are the first thing to go, unfortunately. So the duty of the grower is to figure out what is stressing these plants. If the flowers are dropping, is it because it's 95 degrees in there? Is it because I'm heating in the winter and I might have ethylene? You have to narrow it down until you figure out what it is. Okay, now we have fruit that are way undersized. They're really, really small fruit. And who wants to take a stab at this? What makes the fruit so small? Okay, too many fruit. That's not a bad suggestion because sometimes you get flower clusters with 15 flowers on there. And if you leave all of them, yeah, the average size is going to be smaller. That wasn't the case with this one. Who else wants to take a stab at it? There are no wrong answers. Oh, yeah, there are wrong answers. Go ahead. Go ahead. Fertility. You mean lack of fertility? Lack of fertility can certainly make the fruit smaller, the average size smaller. I will say these are much smaller than normal. I'll take one more guess if somebody's up for it. What is it? Okay, wow. He nailed it. Did you hear what he said? Pollination. This is a pollination problem. And there are several ways you can tell. The diagnostic to tell if you're not sure is cut the fruit this way, a transverse cut, not this way. Cut it this way, and tomato fruit has cells, which are called locules, usually 5. And you look in those locules, and they should be filled with seeds that are surrounded with a gel, right? You know, when you're eating a salad, that stuff that leaks out and it tastes really good, unless you don't like tomatoes, in which case you can leave now. But they should be filled with seeds and gel in there. If you see some locules that are empty or almost empty, it's poor pollination. If you don't get the seeds, you don't get the gel. If you don't get the gel, they don't puff out, and you get flat sides. Look at this angle here, because this is flat, this is depressed. That shiny part is actually sunken in a little bit. They should be all puffed out and round, like all blown up. This is poor pollination. Very good. He gets the award. Whoever has that $1,000 gift certificate. Okay, don't forget. Just ask for it after I leave. Okay, so small tomatoes, we mentioned all of these things, but this is poor pollination. Okay, now we get into some leaf symptoms, and there are all kinds of leaf symptoms. I'm not really covering diseases. You know, you had a good talk on diseases. So this is yellowing. So I'm breaking the yellowing down into interveinal versus not interveinal. So interveinal means between the veins. So the veins are green, between the veins is yellow. That's interveinal chlorosis is what it's really called. If it's on the upper leaves, it's probably a nutrient deficiency. If it's just up here and the rest of the plant is green, probably iron or manganese deficiency. Only way you can tell is with a tissue test. If it's the lower leaves, it's probably magnesium. Manganese is a minor element, micro element. Magnesium is a macro. You need a lot more magnesium in the plant. So let's not confuse those. But magnesium is a very common deficiency, and it's easy to spot. If the plant is this tall and the yellowing is interveinal down there, probably magnesium deficiency. Okay, now if it's not interveinal, like they're just yellow, there's several things. If the whole plant is yellowish to light green, probably low nitrogen. If the bottom leaves are yellow and not diseased looking, and then they're just yellow, they are shaded. If the shaded leaves are called senescent. Senescent has the same root as senior and senile. It means old. Okay, so the leaves are old and they're not productive anymore. So the plant just sort of lets them die off. Then we get into diseases, and I'm not the disease speaker here, but the most common are early blight, target spot, which are alternaria diseases, where they make a brown spot on the lower leaves, and then it makes a bullseye around it, concentric rings, then the leaves fall off. It's probably early blight. Okay, so now we'll switch from leaves to fruit, and somebody had a picture of one of these before. No names, it was her. There are all kinds of fruit yellowing and distortion of colors. You can get green stripes or streaks. Sometimes the blossom end has like a greenish yellow star on it. And then, of course, there's green shoulder. Some of the older tomato varieties would always have a green shoulder, especially in warm weather. Newer varieties don't do that. So a lot of possibilities. High fertility, like too much nitrogen, not enough potassium, which is very common. It will make greenish areas on the fruit. High temperature. Remember, 5 minutes? Okay, I'll be done in 10 to 15. I'll try. We said that lycopene was the pigment that makes the fruit red. Well, if it gets above like 94, the lycopene gets destroyed. And then you see the chlorophyll, which is green. And then this is a weird one you may never see, but if you do, it's good to know. This is called russeting. And russeting is fine cracks on the surface. You know, when you buy pears, sometimes you buy russet pears. They cost a little more. You buy russet potatoes, and they cost more than the other ones. Well, with tomatoes, they don't cost more because they're worthless. They lose water. You don't want that. Russeting causes water loss and therefore a very poor shelf life. They lose weight and they'll shrivel in the stores, so you can't sell them. Usually from moisture on the surface, like in the early mornings, too much moisture, you got to turn on the exhaust fans, get that moisture out. And then when you're topping the plant 6 weeks before the end of the crop, leave 2 or 3 leaves above the highest cluster. Sun scald is the same as sunburn. I mean, similar to sunburn, but don't put sunscreen on your tomatoes. That's for people. Okay, so sun scald is a little burn spot on the usually the upper surface, where the sun's going to hit it. It won't be on the bottom. So again, keep some good leaf cover above that. And then wilting. Is it biotic? meaning from a disease, or is it abiotic, meaning a broken stem? Or is it a bad emitter? If it's a bad emitter, you can replace the emitter, unclog it, and be done with it. Okay, now the weirdest looking one is edema, which is a blistering of the bottoms of the leaves. This is a high humidity symptom. Fortunately, it doesn't hurt the plant. It looks worse than probably any of the other things, but it doesn't hurt. And then spray burn is when you're using, say, a backpack sprayer and your pressure is just too high and the abrasion is causing these marks. So if it's on the stems or the leaves, not a big deal. If it's on the fruit, it looks too much like spot and speck and septoria and all those nasty diseases. Now here's the quiz. What's this one? This is Roundup damage, also known as glyphosate. So the point to this is, don't use Roundup in the greenhouse. It should never be used in the greenhouse. You have tomatoes in there, and they're very, very sensitive. And you don't even want to spray Roundup outside the greenhouse while there's a crop in there, because it does get in. I've seen it several times with growers that the Roundup will get in. This is suggestions if you want to keep the pest population alive. You put your house plants in there in the winter to overwinter them, or your neighbor's plants, and this is a wiring technique. Use your diagnostics resources, your agents, your specialists, your friends in the business, and get help when you need it. Again, these are all online. Tomato Troubles is the best publication I have online that covers what I just talked about. And then Environmental Control helps you with knowing how to size the heaters and vents and horizontal airflow fans and all that. So there's Tomato Troubles. That's the website. It's easy enough to Google. Be a worrier. Watch for problems. And, oh yeah, last one. What's wrong with this? There's nothing wrong with this. Okay, nothing. Okay, you should learn what good tomatoes look like. These look fine. Okay, just checking. And do we have like 10 seconds for questions? Okay. I try not to go over. I don't like going over. Yes.
I have a question, and I probably had to step out earlier when you mentioned this. Hey, Patrick, use the mic. Oh.
Beginners, what are you going to do?
Yeah, so my question is, you mentioned topping. That's a pruning practice for determinate tomatoes?
Okay, what is topping? Yeah, I really didn't explain it. You didn't miss anything. Topping is when you pinch off the top of the plant. And why would you do that? Well, this is on indeterminate tomatoes, the ones that will grow forever until something or somebody kills them. So, you know, depending on your climate, your state, you know how late in the spring you can grow a crop before it's just too dang hot. That's a technical term, too dang hot. So in Mississippi, that's like May 15th to June 1st, sometimes June 15th. It's too hot. So whenever that date is in your area, you count back 6 weeks and you cut the top of the plant off, because you don't need your water and fertilizer going into making more fruit, because they won't have time to mature. So you don't want any more flowers at the top. So topping is cutting off the top of the plant, leaving 2 leaves above the cluster you're topping above. So if you have flowers or small fruit here, you don't want to cut right above them. Leave 2 to 3 leaves and then cut it. That's topping. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I really didn't cover that.
So is there like a, oh yes, thank you. Is there like a publication that maybe, when do we know when to do that?
You figure from pollination, it takes about 6 weeks for the fruit to be ready to pick, like 42 days, 6 weeks. So that's why I said 6 weeks before you're going to terminate the whole crop and pull it out, you want to top, because you're allowing the young fruit at the top of the plant just enough time to mature. So when's it too hot in here in the summer to grow? Like June? sometime in June.
Maybe in July.
Okay, so maybe if July 1 is your termination date, you count back about 6 weeks and say May 15th, you cut the top off. You want all of these fruit to mature and ripen, but you don't need more flowers making more fruit because they're not going to, you won't have time. The season's over July 1 or 4th of July. Actually,
Now the growers should be topping.
yeah. If July 1 or first week in July is the end, but I'm not sure when it gets too hot here to grow.
Yeah, I think it might be later than July 1.
Okay,
I mean about the chart.
Yeah.
well into July? Or you can't grow all the way through the summer here, though, can you? In a greenhouse?
We can, yeah.
In the greenhouse?
Especially with shade cloth.
Okay, you have a real benefit here that you can do that.
We have really good farmers here in Missouri.
The best. That's what I've heard. The best. Further south, there is just no way. It'll be 110 in the greenhouse. You know, if it's 90 outside, it could be 110, 120 in the greenhouse. You can't grow tomatoes in that.
We do have another question that came in the chat. And this is from Dustin. What would cause a leaf to spiral like a snail shell?
What would cause a leaf? Okay, what I'm guessing is that this is relating to the physiological curling, the picture where it rolls up on itself. I hope that's what the
Well, he
question
may
is.
be talking about ethylene perhaps, or even herbicide.
Okay, well, yeah, you're right. I mean, if it's not physiological curling on the lower leaves, the two other possibilities are a phenoxy herbicide like 2,4-D or dicamba. If there was drift from a field, or even worse, sometimes people use weed and feed on their lawn, which it's up to them. Use the weed and feed, but the weed and feed often includes 2,4-D and or dicamba. And those, if they get into the greenhouse, can cause the leaves to curl up. The other one is virus. There are several viruses that tomatoes can get, and those weren't really covered. TMV was mentioned, but there's one called cucumber mosaic virus. Even though it says cucumber, tomatoes can get it. And that causes the leaves to be very thin. It's called strap-like leaves, and they sort of curl. So there are a whole slew of viruses that can cause that. But one diagnostic tool is look at where is the damage. Is it every plant in the greenhouse, or is it one here, one there? If it's a virus, it's more likely sporadic. Because they're insect vectored, and the whiteflies aren't going down the line getting every single plant. Wherever they land, that's where they infect. Whereas with the ethylene damage, it's more likely at the heater end, that end of the greenhouse. And so looking at the pattern of damage or symptoms is very helpful.
Other questions?
Yeah, calcium application is needed to correct blossom end rot, or calcium needs to be applied to the tomato to prevent blossom end rot. So when is the best time to apply calcium? And does one has to continue to apply this calcium throughout the life cycle of the tomato plant, or it has to be applied to certain stage?
Okay, the question is calcium. When should it be applied? The plants in a greenhouse need calcium through the whole life cycle. So typically, if somebody has an injector, as Juan showed a slide with different tanks. So your calcium nitrate is in one of the tanks. And they do need to get the calcium throughout the entire crop to prevent things like blossom end rot. Lack of calcium also causes cell death at the apices, meaning the tip of the plant, but also the tip of the roots. So if they don't get enough calcium, the tips of the roots die and they stop growing, and the top of the plant turns black and just stops growing as well. But yeah, they need calcium the whole crop.
Let's thank Rick for the presentation.